Hi everyone, thank you, Reed. As she mentioned, my name is Andrew Welle. I'm a senior staff attorney at Our Children's Trust. We're a nonprofit organization based in Eugene, Oregon, and we solely are dedicated to protecting the fundamental rights of young people in relation to the climate crisis and holding their governments accountable for policies and actions that have contributed to the climate crisis. So I'll let these three young people, Kelsey, Sahara, and Isaac, speak to their motivations and their impacts for why they are part of Juliana versus United States, the constitutional climate change case against the federal government. But I'll just speak briefly and broadly to the nature of that lawsuit, where we started and where we are today and how we got there. So, as I mentioned, these three youth are part of a cohort of 21 youth from all over the country who filed suit in 2015 against the executive branch, then the Obama administration, but since then the suit has been inherited by the Trump administration. And the reason that they brought suit is that all 21 of these youth are experiencing the profound impacts of the climate crisis in various ways, depending on their geographic locations, their interests, and other kind of unique circumstances and variations according to their interests. But the legal theory behind the case is that the United States government at the highest levels of the executive branch, dating back to at least the 1960s, has had intimate and profound knowledge of the dangers of climate change. So to give you kind of one small example of that, we have documents dating back to the Johnson administration, for instance, a letter from one of his closest personal advisors detailing the dangers and science behind climate change, its attribution to the combustion of greenhouse gases, and recognition of some of its most terrifying impacts. So for instance, this one letter detailed the science behind climate change and said, if we don't wean ourselves off of fossil fuels, goodbye New York, goodbye Seattle, goodbye Washington, D.C., acknowledging that sea level rise endangers all of those cities. But despite this profound knowledge at these highest levels of the executive branch, and when we have documentation of that knowledge at each administration subsequent to the Johnson administration, but despite that knowledge and technological and economically feasible alternatives at each of those junctures and administrations, the United States government and the executive branch has continued to promote policies that not only fail to address climate change, but that make it worse. So for instance, by promoting the development of fossil fuels on federal lands, permitting coal and gas-fired power plants, and infrastructure that enables a fossil fuel industry. So one of the broadest misconceptions about this litigation that we come across frequently is this idea that the United States government is merely not doing enough to address climate change. But that's not what this suit is about. It's about ways that the United States government has actively endangered these young people by not only ignoring the risks, but by making them worse by affirmatively promoting fossil fuels. So the case was filed in 2015 in August, and the theory of the case is that having this long-standing knowledge of the dangers of climate change, and despite that knowledge doubling down on the affirmative causation of climate change, the United States government is actively endangering these young people in violation of their due process rights under the Fifth Amendment of the United States Constitution. That knowing of those dangers, it's treating them disproportionately unfairly to today's generation of adults, favoring current or short-term fossil fuel industry to their detriment, and that discriminates them, again, in violation of the Equal Protection Clause of the Fifth Amendment, and that it also violates their rights under the Public Trust Doctrine, which is an ancient principle that actually dates back to Roman law, but has been inherited by the United States and recognized by the United States Supreme Court through the Roman Empire, through English common law, and then now adopted as a fundamental guiding principle and background principle of sovereignty that applies to all governments. The basic idea is that all crucial natural resources that are crucial for the survival of citizens and the health of our nation are held in trust by governments as an inherent sovereign obligation, and that they have to manage those resources even-handedly for the benefit of future and present generations equally. Since filing the case in 2015, we've had a long road. It's now 5 years later. There's a reason that people use the phrase, let's not make a federal case out of this, because it takes a long time. But in this case, it's been highly unusual. it is a high-profile case, but it's also highly unusual for a federal case to take this long. And the reason is the vehement opposition and kind of unorthodox tactics that have been employed by the federal government in defending this case. So one of the first things that we saw was the suit was filed against the executive branch, the Department of the Interior, Department of Defense, the United States Environmental Protection Agency, the Department of Energy, and a number of other executive branch agencies. But immediately we saw an attempt to intervene in the case on behalf of the fossil fuel industry and a number of trade groups that collectively represent basically every oil and gas group within the United States, who intervened to say we want to be defendants in this case too, because this profoundly affects our business interests. They moved to dismiss the case, as did the Obama administration, and in November of 2016, the United States District Court for the District of Oregon issued an opinion denying those motions to dismiss and recognizing previously unrecognized fundamental constitutional right to a stable climate system that protects human life. And the reasoning behind that recognition was not that this is a new, previously unheard of fundamental right, but that it undergirds and really is the supporting foundation for all of the rest of our civil liberties and our rights to life, liberty, and property. So since that order denying the motion to dismiss, the United States government then transitioned to the Trump administration, who took an even more aggressive approach to trying to defend against this case, really doing everything that they could to keep the facts from seeing the light of day and for us going to trial. And we've been up and down the federal court system since in kind of this unorthodox play by the Trump administration to seek early appeal. Ordinarily, you go entirely through the court system or the trial system before you have a final judgment, before you're subject to appeal. But in very rare circumstances, you can have early appeals outside that process. And the Trump administration's DOJ has availed themselves of every opportunity to try to take advantage of that. And as a result, we've been up to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals 5 times and the United States Supreme Court twice. But we've had favorable rulings in all of those cases. And up until recently, we were finally up on another early interlocutory appeal, and I'll speak to that in a moment. But before we got there, we were able to present some of our evidence in the United States District Court. We had over 21 experts from across disciplines, from economics to medical and public health experts, experts opining on the feasibility economically and technologically of a transition to a clean energy system in the United States. And many of those were Nobel Prize winners, actually. I guess I should back up and say, what exactly the youth are asking for in their case as well, and what the remedy would look like. So, in systemic constitutional cases like the one that we're here talking to you about today, which is kind of reminiscent of other systemic constitutional cases like school desegregation from the 1950s and 60s, or prison litigation reform, it's commonplace to seek what's called a structural remedy, in which the district courts say, I found a constitutional violation that's so pervasive that the court is not going to dictate exactly what's necessary for the federal government to do to rectify the constitutional violations that are inherent in the system that's causing harm, but they will order the defendants in the executive branch to come up with a plan of their own devising to meet the constitutional standards that are fashioned by the court. And in our case, what we're asking for is the fashioning of a constitutional standard that recognizes what is inherently necessary to protect the fundamental rights of young people relative to the climate crisis. And that's informed by science as to what level of carbon dioxide emissions and concentrations in the atmosphere are safe to protect our future and the future of our young people. And what our experts opine is that that is 350 parts per million atmospheric concentrations of carbon dioxide. We're currently at about 410 parts per million. And the warming that we've experienced today does not reflect the latent warming that will still occur and is locked into the pipeline, so to speak, as a result of the excess concentrations of carbon dioxide that are already present in the atmosphere. So as I mentioned, we've been up and down the court system, but we've had favorable rulings many times from the Ninth Circuit and from the United States Supreme Court. The case was ultimately brought up to the Ninth Circuit again on interlocutory appeal about a year and a half ago, and we had oral argument in the case before the Ninth Circuit in June of last summer. And at that point, we had and as we have in each previous iteration in all these courts, we've had an enormous outpouring of support from organizations, all across the board, from law professors, but notably probably for this group, a number of public health organizations weighing in, and they submitted briefs which are called amicus curiae briefs, which means friends of the court, in which they're saying, we have an interest in this case and we think that it should come out this way. We support the young plaintiffs for these reasons. So there is a lot of support from the public health community, and the Harvard Law School Law Clinic actually put together a brief on behalf of a number of public health organizations. So we were looking at the American Heart Association, American Lung Association, the American Pediatric Society, the American Thoracic Society, the American Association of Community Psychiatrists, and I think 15 other public health and medical organizations, as well as a number of individual medical practitioners signing on, recognizing that the climate crisis is a public health crisis for young people in particular, and supporting the constitutional theory that we brought forward in the case. So unfortunately, the latest development in our case is that we received a decision from the Ninth Circuit on January 17th recommending dismissal of the case. But there were a lot of positive aspects to that decision. It recognized, number one, that climate change is an emergency that's currently facing our nation, and that it directly affects the young people who are in the suit. And it also recognized that the harm that's occurring to these young people and the climate emergency that we find ourselves in now is not simply a result of government inaction, but that it's substantially a causal result of the United States government's historic policies, notwithstanding their knowledge for decades of the dangers that are occurring. But having recognized both the injuries that are at issue in this case and that they're causally related to the government's conduct, the court essentially threw up its hands and said, there's nothing that courts can do to address this situation, or even to diminish the rate at which climate change is occurring, or to forestall some of the injuries that are resulting from that. It's our position at Our Children's Trust and those of the plaintiffs that that conclusion is not correct legally or factually, and that at minimum, the court system can say, we're going to enjoin the United States government from further promoting fossil fuels on federal lands, and that would at least slow the progressive rate of the climate crisis here. And then also it's within the court's authority when they recognize profound constitutional violations of a systemic nature, which are at issue here, which the court did recognize, that in keeping with other fundamental constitutional systemic violations that have previously been found, such as in school desegregation cases, the court can set the broad parameters of what needs to be done by the federal government while leaving it to them to come up with a comprehensive plan to transition the United States to a clean energy economy. So the case is not over. We're going to be appealing that decision to a larger panel of the Ninth Circuit. And so stay tuned, because we're hopeful that we will still be able to progress further, considering we've been favorable and successful this far. But I'll turn it over to our young plaintiffs here to discuss their experiences, how climate change is affecting them, and their motivations for joining the suit.
Hi everybody, my name is Isaac and I'm from Beaverton, so right across the hills right here. And how I got involved in this lawsuit and just climate change work in general, started when I was around 13 years old. For my bar mitzvah project, I had to do Tikkun Olam project, which is Hebrew for repairing the earth. And so I did a divestment campaign for Beaverton to remove the investments that we had in fossil fuel industry like Exxon and Shell. And so I did that, and then I also did my Devar Torah on the climate crisis and how the Torah, which is the Jewish scripts, ancient scripts, on how that, my bar mitzvah portion, ties into the climate crisis and what we can do about it. And that also happened around the same time that I joined the lawsuit. And I mainly joined the lawsuit because I know that it's as much as I enjoy going out and going to rallies and testifying in front of city councils and everything that goes with that, I also know that it's very important to take some legal action to make some effective change that will send seeds into the United States and hopefully reverse everything that we've done. And so I joined the lawsuit in 2015. I was 14 years old, so right after my bar mitzvah, and it's been really great ever since. I joined because the year after that and the year before that, we had some pretty big wildfires here in Oregon. And so I kind of got my first real experience of climate change and the harms that wildfires can do on an asthmatic kid's lungs. I woke up one morning back in 2014 and saw that outside it was bright orange. The sun was bright orange red, and I was like, oh, this is really cool and everything. And I stepped outside and I just instantly started coughing, and I had to go get my rescue inhaler and take a couple puffs of that. And I was just completely shocked that the Columbia Gorge was set ablaze by some kids who wanted to play with fireworks, and it just set off a whole chain reaction throughout the rest of the gorge, and it settled in the valley where we live for the next week during that summer, and that really brought everything home. It's completely different learning about climate change when you're hearing that it's flooding other people's homes, it's burning other people's crops and other people's land, but when you have it happen to you or impact you or people who you're close to, it brings a whole new meaning to the climate crisis and the movement and what you need to do about it. And so that's why I joined the lawsuit, and working with the plaintiffs and the attorneys and staff at Our Children's Trust has been amazing. It's such a supportive community, and everyone has like such an individual aspect that they bring to the lawsuit, and it just makes everything wholesome and really whole, and I'm glad to be part of it.
Okay, yeah, you can hear me. Hi everyone, my name's Sahara. I'm 15 right now, I live in Eugene. And I joined this lawsuit when I was 11. It was filed like 2 or 3 days after my 11th birthday. And how I got involved was I first went to a camp that was led by Our Children's Trust, which is like the group partnering with this lawsuit. And that's how I first came to understand the impacts and learn about climate change, because I really hadn't had much information given to me before that. So after I learned about what climate change was, I started becoming more involved in my community. I went to city council and testified. I wrote a letter to the editor. But at that point, after all of that, I didn't really know what to do, and I knew I wanted to do something else. And then magically, it seemed, our lead lawyer, Julia, sent me an email and asked me if I wanted to be a plaintiff on this case. And it seemed like the perfect opportunity to me. And I had no idea how long it would be or the extent I would be speaking in public and all of this. But I'm very glad I became a plaintiff. And that's definitely given me the opportunity to speak more and share my story and learn about other people's stories. And Matt mentioned this for a little bit, but he was talking about how important it is if we're given the chance to speak about this issue. And that's why I'm here today, because yes, maybe I'd rather be skiing or watching a movie with my friends, but this is really what's most important to me. I was given this opportunity, so I'm very glad to be able to be here and talk about this and learn. Matt's presentation was amazing. I learned a bunch of incredible facts, thank you. But for my health impacts, I, as well as Isaac, have asthma. I was hospitalized as a baby. And pretty much the same time period with the forest fires. It was at the end of summer, I think like 2 or 3 years ago, when I hadn't had much experience with the forest fires that badly, and then I, of course, saw it in the air and then stepped outside, and my lungs were definitely affected, and school was canceled. We were told not to go outside, which is horrible, and youth should be able to go outside, and definitely go outside a lot more than a lot of the older generations just need the energy or just need to let other energy outside, and that's part of their growing, it's part of health. And we were told not to by like our news and everything. And so since then, I've definitely become a lot more aware of all the impacts, and especially the impacts of our other plaintiffs. There are some crazy impacts. One of our plaintiffs' house was flooded, and being in Eugene, there isn't a whole lot of huge things like hurricanes or floods or anything. So it's somewhat sheltered, which obviously I'm very thankful for. I haven't been impacted by something that like big and crazy. But I know that it's happening to a lot of other people, our plaintiffs included, and being able to talk with the plaintiffs and hear how they feel, and like what Isaac said about we hear it's happening to people, tons of people, but when you can really connect with someone one-on-one and hear how they feel, and what it's done to them and their experiences and their health, it really gets you thinking and realizing that you need to do more about this. So, yeah.
Hi everyone, I'm Kelsey. Thank you for having us. I'm also from Eugene. I was actually born out in Fall Creek in the woods, but Oregonian. My middle name was Cascadia. And yeah, thank you for having us all here. I'm a plaintiff on this federal case, of course, but I'm also actually a plaintiff on the state against Governor Brown. We just heard oral arguments in front of the Oregon Supreme Court here in Portland at a high school just in December. So collectively between the two cases, I've been involved for about 10 years. I turned 24 in a couple months, and I first joined and said, yeah, I want to hold my government accountable for an issue that I personally cared about since I was a toddler. I can't believe there's nothing being done about this, to take my life so seriously as I do, and certainly my parents do. And so I filed that case when I was 14, also entering high school. And here I am, not a teenager. So it's true. It's an expression for a reason. It does take a long time, but luckily we have agencies, individuals, communities who are supporting us and doing their own work. In the meantime, while we wait for the more larger substantive change to happen, we all can play a part. So I really applaud Matt's comment, and I also applaud your question, and I will backtrack and get to why I'm here. But I just want to say this. Thank you, because this is often a question of, is it politics? Why, is it a matter of belief? Look at us, literally stand up. Like, please. I want to be a teacher. I'm not trying to be a politician. I did not sign up for this as a 10-year-old because I had some sort of political conviction. I cared about the fact that the home state and the land that I was quite literally named after, born in the middle of the woods, was being degraded, was being destroyed. I was personally being impacted. I grew up calling the woods church. Every Sunday we would go for a hike. And so the fact that the land, the water, to which I was named after, Kelsey Creek, I can keep going, and the oceans turning to acidification, these are all very real issues that we face in Oregon. There are loss of food shortage. I've been sick from inhaling water that apparently had parasites in it and spent years dealing with that issue, from rising temperatures that then increase algae in lakes, rivers, and of course we have issues in our oceans. And so all of these issues are very utilitarian. What are we going to have for food source? What are we going to drink? Can we breathe the air today? Apparently we have to look out the window, but with fine particulate matter, it's so much more severe than just a matter of the visual image. It's something that's so serious and impacts us so deeply. And it's beyond that. It's a matter of a spiritual connection that I have, a very serious need to protect and to preserve the vitality of this landscape. And it's also a matter of, for a lot of us, recreation. We grew up in this place, our parents moved to this place or are from here, not mine, because they love this landscape. And growing up backpacking, hiking, being on the water, all those things threatened from a loss of snowpack and drying up waters and whatnot. And then there's the very real risk. So those fires, we all remember that summer. I am a student, I'm a teacher, I work in the service industry, I also work with kids outside. And that summer I was economically at risk because I had work canceled. I was told to stay inside. I couldn't bring my kids outside. That's rough. And kids I teach. And so yeah, we have a lot of risks that young people are faced with across the board that you all deal with as well. But something that we also deal with, and again, I'm 23, I'm the oldest of the 21 individuals, but I've also been worried about this issue and been very vocal about this issue for a long time. And since I was a little child, the number one driver of this, above all those other things, was the psychological harm. What is climate change? Yes, I'm physically feeling it on my skin, in my lungs, in my head. Like, I'm worried about this issue. But what is this gonna look like for my kids? What is it gonna look like for my 10-year-old? Because let me tell you, my mother spent 11 months walking across the country when she was my age, talking about global warming. This is not a new issue. Our own government wrote out memos in the 1960s calling the trend of rising sea levels and CO2 emissions apocalyptic. So imagine you are a young child addicted in video games and apocalyptic culture with all these new, whatever, the Pride and zombie movies coming out every day. I don't know. Is a Kristen Stewart one a movie? I don't know. And you have, apocalypse is always in your mind. And it's a thing of what? What is it? A thing of terror. Apocalypse is death. It's disease. It's people going literally insane over loss of natural resources. And our government was worried about an apocalyptic reality in the 1960s because of their own actions. This is nothing new. And the psychological harm of not only thinking, oh my gosh, I'm worried about my own life right now, what is it gonna look like for my kids, but understanding, backtracking and saying, oh, this is intentional, and this can be changed. These are all a matter of choices. Wildfires, an issue we think about very severely, and which one individual commented on, why is there such a high rate of wildfires in this area? Wildfire problem is also a result of choices, of a my father's a wildfire ecologist, full disclosure, so massive fire suppression, the tampering of the landscape, the not understanding the fundamental value of people and the planet's lives and well-being. Like this, all of these issues have got us here today. And so we are grateful to be on the stage talking about the very real health impacts that young people face. And we also understand, even though we are young, that this predates us, and we are here not only for our own individual lives as 21 individual people, spanning thousands of geographic miles and 11 years in age difference. We are here on behalf of all future generations because we have that burden, we have that concern on our heads and in our hearts. What is this reality going to look like for generations down the line? not only will they be able to have healthy air to breathe and healthy water to drink, but will they be able to actually stand on this earth? Will they actually have a future to I don't know. Will there be a future? ... So, thank you.
We'll have about 15 minutes for question and answer. I just want to say thank you again to Andrew, Kelsey, Sahara, and Isaac for coming and giving such inspirational message and sharing your personal stories and having the courage to do so in front of this audience. So with that, we'll take questions, and please raise your hand and say your name before you ask your question.
Joyce Webb from Seattle. First of all, it's astounding your level of commitment at your age. I think for myself and many of us in this room at age 10, 15, maybe even 18, I was pretty self-centered and just, teenage stuff. So it's just remarkable, your sense of looking forward, and really applaud you for that. In addition to the lawsuits, which I think are critically important, you just keep fighting this. I was interested in whether your group nationally are working with the international organizations or individuals like Greta Thunberg, and I think for many of us, seeing you guys going, this is the future, because I think many individuals opposing and groups are looking at the present. Because I think just the bigger this is, the more we're hearing globally, I think that also adds to the action. So I was interested in whether your group of 21 individuals are pursuing that.
Also, is it preferred if I stand? I don't really know how this goes. What's that now?
Whatever you want.
Okay.
I think you want to say.
Thank you for your question. What was your name?
Joyce.
Oh, I'm Joyce. Yes, absolutely. So thank you for asking that, because you have a couple of local representatives, but we have plaintiffs, like I said, Hawaii, Southern Florida, Manhattan, all over. And one of the reasons that we all came together, or how we all came together, was because of a lot of us, our previous engagement in other work. So I've worked with Earth Guardians, Greenpeace, 350, Sierra Student Coalition, and a lot of the plaintiffs actually I knew before even getting involved in this work. We all came to this case because we said, I want to take action, and in my case, actually the first hearing I'd ever had. I was 14, like I said, and I was really fired up. I'd never been in a courtroom before, and after the reporter was like, Kelsey, but what happens if you don't win? And I was like, well, then back to the streets I go. Like, come on, I'm seasoned. I'm 14 years old. I've been doing this for 5 years. So yes, we are all we're committed to this issue because it is our life, period. And a lot of us have been or are currently involved in other organizations. We've been to DC several times as a group and met with members of Congress, both just as a contingent of our own group, talking about supporting the Juliana case, and also with other, as a larger group of different organizations, all student or young person led. And we've worked with Greta, and we also have worked alongside and helped to support and elevate other cases around the world. So Matt talked about heat as a very serious health risk. With heat also leads to sleep deprivation, which I definitely felt that summer as well, which leads to aggravated temperaments. Not a good thing. And there is a case in Switzerland led by several hundred elder women, specifically talking about heat. So that is, elder women in Switzerland are being so highly or disproportionately affected by heat waves that they have filed a case against their government targeting climate change on that very specific health risk. So, and yes, we worked with groups all over the world, in the Philippines, in Norway, and Mexico. So it is definitely an international movement, and we are representing a legal perspective, trying to ingrain our rights to life, our rights to a stable climate system, but we're also involved, and we also definitely recognize all other types of work that's being done on the grounds, in the classrooms, etc.
Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sarai from Boise, District 20, the DA. I have a question about, you talked about the funding of the other side that's helping the government. Perhaps you can speak a little bit about the funding for the Children's Fund. And also, my second question is regarding what would be a good resolution for this case in the ideal world? What are you trying to get out of it? Like, what would be the end game?
Sure. So, I'll clarify a bit that the federal government in this lawsuit is not being funded directly by the fossil fuel industry, but that the fossil fuel industry intervened on their own behalf to say that we have something at stake here. There's probably a broader conversation to be had about the alignment between the Trump administration's policies and the fossil fuel industry generally, especially given that the fossil fuel industry groups that intervened in this case actually withdrew once they were ordered to take a factual position on the realities and science of climate change in a court of law. They vehemently had been arguing against us and trying to get the case thrown out, but the moment that they were court ordered to take a position on the facts and science of climate change, they said, we want out of this suit. And the justification that they gave at that very kind of serendipitous timing was that they believed that the Trump administration could adequately protect their interests in this case. But to speak to our funding from our Children's Trust, we're entirely a charitably funded organization. We're a 501c3 nonprofit law firm. And the vast majority of our funding is from small individual contributions from people throughout the United States and across the world. But we also do rely on grants from organizations like the Leonardo DiCaprio Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation. But as I said, the majority of our funding comes from small individual donations. And in terms of what we would consider a positive resolution for this case, is we want everything that we're asking for. The climate emergency, we don't have a lot of time to address it now. And if you talk to the scientists from various disciplines, from the public health realm, but also the world's leading climatologists, and even organizations like the IPCC, right, which is inherently, believe it or not, kind of a more conservative scientific organization, because the projections that they come to on a consensus basis are what they can tell you with 99.9% scientific certainty, and it's based on data that has a lag time of sometimes up to 5 years. So the climate science is rapidly evolving, and what we know now in terms of the urgency of this crisis is not entirely reflected in the reports that come out from an international scientific consensus. So in light of that urgency, we would argue, and back up and say the most recent IPCC report on this said that we have 12 years to act decisively to avert climate disaster that would be locked in in the event that we don't act within that 12-year period. And to be clear, that does not mean that we have 12 years before we start acting. It means we need to start today to avert climate disaster. And what that means is that the United States, as one of the largest historic cumulative emitters of carbon dioxide, we're responsible for about 25% of the carbon that's been emitted since the Industrial Revolution, making us the largest singular cumulative emitter, and arguably then the most costly responsible for the crisis we find ourselves in now. We have not only a moral imperative, but a legal fundamental human rights obligation to do everything that we can to put ourselves on a trajectory that's consistent with protecting the rights of young people throughout the world and of future generations. And that means a comprehensive plan to wean the United States and transition to a clean fossil fuel energy economy. And should we have the opportunity to go to trial in this case, we're prepared to present expert testimony, documents that shows that not only is that transition and an urgent and rapid transition technologically and feasibly and economically possible, but it's actually economically beneficial for the United States.
You look worldwide, and I think there's reason to hope. I mean, we hear all of this sort of doom, and when you look at the future, it looks so so challenging, and yet Andrew's right. If you look at even current or pace of investment and opportunity, there is a clear path forward for actually not averting all of it, but averting a lot of potential disaster.
Hi, Chris Chandra. I'm here in Portland at OHSU. Again, the energy from the youth is fantastic, and I really think that is what we really need moving forward. I wonder if people on the other side, the people that may not be as kind of forward-thinking and thinking about the future, may need to hear a different message. And I'm not sure if that's landing with them in terms of describing what Matt was sharing about your mother who's going to be in a Chicago suburb who has heart disease, who's more likely to die if we have more of these heat waves. Is that message being delivered, or is that something that we as journal internists can kind of help share the message with that other side?
Thanks, great question. So yeah, again, like this question of politics doesn't really resonate with us. And I think that's the beauty of having, and thank you for having us here for that reason. I actually think that along the way we've spoken, I've been to all over talking about this issue, and really I went through small towns of maybe 120 in the middle of Iowa and Indiana, and talking about climate change in the basement of a church. It's it's a matter of our food and our water and the air we breathe, and the fact that my 11-year-old has cancer from methane gas in the water because of fracking. So I think actually you all are very poised to have a very unbiased conversation, because it is about our real health impacts. And it's not about any sort of a political agenda, or again, we're not even proposing policy, right? We are just simply saying we need to have our health risks recognized and protected, and that means doing whatever looks economically viable, whatever looks, most efficient, and you figure out what kind of car we're gonna be driving or whatever. We're not here to do that. The lawsuit and us plaintiffs, we just need to have our health risks identified and our right to a stable climate system and our right to a healthy, livable future protected. That's what we're here. That's our agenda. So I think you all are in a great position to help advocate for what we're doing, and to help advocate for the health and protection of all your patients, understanding that climate change at the end of the day, no matter what type of social justice issue, health problem, economic issue, climate change heightens everything, every single thing across the board. And so I think you're in a great position. And just, if you need more convincing, yes, we've been to DC and we've been in meetings, I say we as in this group, we've been in meetings with really, vehemently identified Republicans, who also young people, and they are right there sitting with us, testifying in front of the House Committee on Foreign Affairs and Climate Change, saying, yeah, this issue matters and it's mattering my life. And we can talk about politics and what climate action looks like, but we need to have this basic right to life recognized first.
Let's give another round.
She said it perfectly. Our voice matters.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Let's give another round of applause. We're going to have a 10-minute break and then meet back in this room for our next talk of outpatient updates at 9:55. Thank you.